part of the meeting. And I really wanted to welcome the two guest speakers that we have today, Marcy Felstead and Tricia, Venema. I think I said it correctly, and she can correct me if I didn't. They're both from the University of Utah, the CME office there. Marcy is the manager, and Tricia is assistant manager and course coordinator there. We're really pleased to have them join us because what they're going to talk about today is better efficiency. And I was unfortunate, or I don't know, there were two people, Ani and Aaron, that were fortunate enough to see this presentation at the ACCME meeting that took place in April in Chicago. I unfortunately picked the wrong session. I didn't get to go to this, but the two of them raved about it. So I was so excited when we were trying to think of topics for this next meeting. And I think Ani and Aaron suggested that we see if these two ladies would be willing to do it for SCMEC. So we're really just thrilled to have you here, and I'm thrilled to learn something during this call. So the thing I just wanted to remind people of before we get started, and then we're going to open up their mics, is for questions. I know Aaron mentioned that before. If you can put them in the chat box, Aaron and I will be monitoring that. And so at the end, we will open it up to questions. But if you have a question as you go, feel free to type it so you don't forget. If for some reason I believe if you want to actually ask the question, maybe you can't figure out the best way to type it. If you actually want to ask the question and you have a normal phone line, let us know in the chat box. Just say you'd like to ask a question on the phone, and then we will unmute your microphone. So without further ado, if you want to open it for Marcy and Tricia, that would be great. Aaron, thank you so much.
Hey everyone, this is Marcy and Tricia.
Hi.
We're so excited to be here talking with you guys. We really were extremely flattered to be asked to do this and excited to hear all about how things are in California as well. So
just to introduce, excuse me, this is Tricia, and to introduce just kind of our program and overall what we do here in the office. We are a decentralized model of a program, so we don't necessarily handle all the details of the conference itself, but we do quite a bit still on our side, I have to say. We have about 135 RSSs and 120 courses, but we actually, because we have been able to lean out the process, we've increased our program quite a bit just within this first part of this year. So that was pretty impressive, been able to remain on target for future goals. Myself, as was introduced as a manager, Tricia Venema, and then Marcy, assistant manager, and then we also have Dr. Dolcor, who's the associate dean as part of our team. And we do have two others that help us out, and that's Jackie, who oversees those 135 or so RSSs, and then Ashley, who helps us with the MOC portion.
And so we kind of have a philosophy here at the University of Utah that we want whatever we're doing, we're trying to make it easy, make it valuable, win friends, and improve our patient care. So our main function is to approve activities for CME credit and then meet all the ACCME requirements. We are accredited by ACCME. And to make sure that we're able to go through those audits and things like that come up. But as Trish said, we don't do event logistics or anything like that.
So just to kind of give you an outlook of what we'll be talking about, we want to give you an idea of failures and successes that we have experienced and how we did this, and then that you guys can definitely do it too through positive mental attitude, and then taking a look at your process map and kind of eliminating those extra steps that aren't necessary, that maybe it's required, you think, by the institution versus the ACCME. So you kind of, as Marcy said, ask yourself, why are we doing this? And then who else has done this and how it's going? And then for all of us to share tips and suggestions.
So this all started because we were thinking about, could we approve a series for credit in a day? And the reason we got that idea is we were sitting at an ACCME meeting, And we'd just been through a very contentious discussion on disclosures, and Trish and I were pretty irritated because we didn't get the answers right, and we thought we knew what we were doing. And I'm sure you all have sat through some of those conversations and can share our frustration with that. So then the next thing that happened was Dr. McMahon got up and he said, why can't we offer credit in a day? Why can't we make this very streamlined? And why can't we do just-in-time CME? And so I get a little feisty. This is Marcy talking. And so I took that as a total dare and challenge. And so I said, well, let's try to figure this out. Can we do this? And then another reason we were doing it is we get all this customer feedback all the time, right, about why does it take so long to provide CME? And CME is so hard to get, and there's all these bureaucratic hoops that we have to jump through. And I always picture Ben Stiller in Meet the Parents, right, where he's trying to buy a plane ticket to get out of town because he just had this terrible fight with his future in-laws. And he goes up to the counter, and the airline ticket agent is like typing forever and ever, and she's not making any eye contact with him, and it takes about an hour before she finally gets to what he wants. And then she looks at him and she goes, that'll be $5,000, please. And I really just did not want to be in a situation like that. And it's sometimes some of our feedback that we're getting is that that's the customer service that we're providing. And it's really important to me to make things easy, to be valuable, and to win friends. And so I wanted to make sure that we were not doing that. And then I tend to have a little bit of an adventurous spirit. And so I thought, well, let's just find out. Let's see what happens if we do this. Why not? So that's kind of what got us into this mess, which is beautiful and we love it. But that's why we really focused in on our efficiency. So what happened when we did this? So our first attempt did not go very well. Our learners didn't really want the credit. We kind of were so excited about this idea that we really wanted to try it. And so we twisted a lot of arms. And so we had a friendly director that we knew for a series, and she wanted to start a new series for CME credit. And so we said, okay, we're going to do all the work for you. And we forced her into a professional practice gap, and we kind of strong-armed her to complete our education plan. But she wasn't really that invested in the process. And so what happened is a few people claimed credit. We did get some evaluation results from them, but it just wasn't really a roaring success. So we now call that our practice run and decided to try again. And I'll let Trish tell you what happened when we did that.
So our second attempt was very successful. We received a phone call from one of our PAs, and he was interested in offering CME for his activity, and it just, of course, so happened to be the next day. And so this is when the positive mental attitude comes into play, and you take a breath. And you say, yes, we can definitely offer CME for you, and this is the process. So I explained to him that the next step in order to do this would be to sit down and meet and discuss our CME plan. And so he said he would definitely love to do that. So we set up a time for him and his group, the coordinators, et cetera, who else were involved, to come down and sit down with us for a face-to-face discussion. So we met that afternoon, and they explained to us what their gap was and what they wanted to accomplish. And then we verbally did disclosure. We asked them if they had anything to disclose or any conflicts. And fortunately, they did not. So that did make the process quite a bit easier. And then we were able to explain the other factor that, we need to make sure that education is, completely separate from any commercialism. And then we went all over the major points, but then we were also able to, and this is one thing that's nice to sit down face to face with them, is to express to them different ideas of educational design. So we did suggest for them to do learn, pair, share, and some other ways that they could enhance their activity. So we got that all squared away, and then we told them that the next step would be to review the CME plan that we put together in the office, and then they would need to send us their flyer, which states all of the ACCME required statements along with the AMA credit, et cetera, and disclosure statement. And then from there we could move on. So we worked together as a team and put the CME plan together, and then they were able to review it, and we did receive the flyer that evening, and they met all the requirements. And Mark Hyde, who was, the gentleman who we sat down initially and spoke with, and who said he did not have anything to disclose, he was stated on there as a speaker. So we were all set when it came to disclosure, and they were ready to roll. So he was had a very positive experience when after the activity took place. Everybody was really excited and wanted the CME, and he was extremely excited. And like Marcy said, we won a friend, and we also were able to bring value to the activity because they did end up building in the learn, pair, share, which they expressed as well was very successful. So all in all, we accomplished our huge goal, and I think everybody is on the same page of making CME much more of an added value with the educational structure as opposed to the check boxes. So that was the second attempt, a positive one, definitely.
And then our third attempt happened to me. This is Marcy. So I was here on a Friday afternoon entering PARS data. I'm sure it was PARS data. And Trish had the afternoon off, and I got a phone call. And my friend Dave, who I know personally, is also a physician, and he said, "Hey, I'm doing this training tomorrow, and I want to offer credit for it. Can I?" And I said, "Well, tell me a little bit about it. Do you have a half hour to talk to me?" He said, "Yeah." So I said, I opened up our education plan, and I'm filling out answers as we're talking, and he's telling me what the professional practice gap is and how he designed the activity and what kind of format it's going to be and who's involved, what the target audience is, how he's going to evaluate if people learned anything. And so we're kind of talking through that process, and it all sounds really good. It was a hands-on learning how to use a new device. So I thought, oh, that's really great. We're talking, and then I say, okay, Dave, I know you have a lot of research grants, so tell me more about your relevant financial relationships. I'm going to read you the definition of a commercial interest. So I read in the definition, I said, tell me what your relationships are that the content is related to what you're talking about tomorrow. So he told me a couple of those, and I said, okay, who helped you plan this activity? And do they have conflicts? And he had one person that didn't, so I was able to call her and talk to her and say, how did you guys plan this activity to make sure his bias didn't get in the way? And she said, well, I wrote the presentation. And I said, okay, great. So he's really just presenting it, and for us, that's a way to resolve a planner conflict because he's recusing himself from those conversations, even though he's still being the presenter. And so then we were all set, and I was able to send them, the statements they needed to give to learners, and they were excited to do that and how to claim their credit, and the disclosure statement telling the learners all of his relevant financial relationships. And I had everything I needed documented off of that phone call. And so we were ready to move forward. And so then I said, okay, this is great. Let's do this. And he said, oh, you know what? Never mind. They just canceled. They only had 2 people that were going to come to it. I'm like, great. So it's a really good example for me to talk about in presentations like this. And it was really helpful because I got to practice what do we do if they do have a conflict of interest or they do have any relevant financial relationships that we want to investigate a little bit more. So that was really helpful. And then since that time, we haven't done a lot of in that same day kind of activities, but we have gotten much faster in our process. So we did a couple that are listed here, our Leadership Development Institute, and that is really our C-suite people that attend that. So pretty important people to our institution, and we want to make sure that they know what CME is and that they're really excited to get it. And so we had offered it for this series in the past, but they sort of thought it was too much work and too many hoops to jump through. So we were able to get one of our friends to say, like, I really want to have this. And so that coordinator got in touch with us again and was like, all right, they're making me do this. What do I have to do? And we walked her through it super fast within like 4 hours. And we got through everything she needed. And so it's really good for us just within our organization, but it's also a highly interprofessional, very inspiring, very hands-on, very engaged learners kind of activity. So it's one that we're really proud to be a part of. And then the other one is our occupational health grand rounds, and that was one that also had never had CME, and we were really excited to be a part of that because of the public health components involved with that. So I'm sure you can tell that I'm really aiming for some accommodation criteria here. And being able to smooth kind of our process really allows us to expand our scope a lot. in ways that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Okay, so how do we do this? What do we do getting ready to do this?
This is Tricia. So you need to take a look and use some of your tools, David, previously. So you want to make things as easy as possible for your educational partners and yourselves. So that means take a step back and really look at your actual process. And like I had said earlier, really dig deep and figure out if this is extra work in addition to it's not necessary to do, and just really slim it down to make it efficient. So then it is quick. So we were able to do that, and we still are on track, and we still are efficient. And then the next step is the goal is to stick to your typical process. So you don't want to go too far off the tracks. You want to still have that checklist in front of you. And then you also, provide the value of CME to the providers and not lose, the big thing is not lose anything by rushing. We definitely want to accommodate the activity and the members, but we also don't want to lose anything that might hurt us when we get audited or take a look at the files. So we don't want to rush, for sure. So this comes back to the positive mental attitude that you need to take a look and really get gutsy. It does take a lot of guts because it can be overwhelming to do all this in one day, but it's doable. You just have to psych yourself up, and then, like Marcy said, it's exciting because it's a win-win for everyone. So if you look at it that way, as opposed to a daunting, more taskful situation, it's actually kind of fun. It's a good challenge. And then the other thing is to pay attention to what's around you. So when you are bogged down into all the paperwork and not really checking out what the outside has to offer, you miss those opportunities that could help your process. So such as, for example, we realized that the COIs that we have are the same COIs that the nursing uses. So we talked to them, and we decided that there was no need to do two. So we accept theirs. Theirs is a little bit more in depth than ours, but it still gets across the definition that the ACCME requires. So that eliminates a redundant, unnecessary piece of work. So when you notice those things, that makes it easier for a lot of people. And then the other one is to rely on your team. So you really need to make sure that everybody understands what it is that we're trying to do, what our ultimate goal is, and talk to them and make sure that they're on the same page and that they're willing to help, because without your other team members, you can't do it on your own. So.
And then just the other point here, I was at an ACCME meeting probably a year and a half ago, and I was saying, like, oh, it's so hard. We have to get these signatures from our directors on our applications, and we're bugging them, and we're bugging them, and we're bugging them, and they never get back to us, and it's holding us up. And some genius in the room said, well, why are you doing that then? The ACCME doesn't require it, and if it's not helping you, stop doing it. And so this total light bulb went off, and I was like, oh my God, why are we doing that? And why are we doing these 17 other things too? And so it really sent us down this road. And so really just kind of paying attention to what's happening around you, what other people are saying that seem like kind of these flip comments that come out of nowhere and don't go anywhere. I'm a huge believer in paying attention to what the universe is trying to tell you. And there's really big clues out there. So how do we figure all of this out? The first thing that we did is go through a process mapping process so we could see all the steps involved in our approval process and how do we get there. This is Marcy speaking. I have an MBA, so I can talk about process mapping things, even though I try not to get too bogged down in the theory. But this is what a process map could look like. These are a couple examples that are out there. And there are people who spend entire lives process mapping, and I don't want anyone on this call to ever do that because it's so boring. But it can be a super helpful tool in helping you see kind of the steps involved and what you're wasting your effort on and how do you get cleaner on it. But it is really grounded in quality improvement and business theory. And here at the University of Utah, we have a value equation that is just value equals quality plus service divided by cost. And so we try to have that guide everything we do at the University of Utah Health. So we kind of were applying all of these different things that are going on around us to figure this out. So our process map, first, it's going to help us figure out what we do and why do we do it that way. It's going to make us ask the question, why are we doing this for every step of your process? You want to cut out any duplicate work. You want to simplify and get rid of the stuff that you don't need. You're going to end up with a visual representation. So suddenly all those invisible steps that somebody's just doing because they've always done it that way become visible. And so you get to ask the question, like, is this really important? What is this adding into my process? Is this helping me? And it can show you the real or perceived relationships between different tasks. So the reality of what's really happening rather than what you ideally want to happen. And if there's something that you're waiting on for somebody before you move on to the next thing, it allows you to look at that relationship. And then you'll be able to clarify or illustrate any vague or complex tasks or topics along the way. It also, the part that I love about it is it helps you really focus on the work rather than people. So in talking to colleagues, sometimes I hear a lot about, well, we had a really bad coordinator years ago and she totally messed up our records and now I'm going to fail my audit, right? But looking at it this way, you can create a system that people can't fail in. And so we're setting ourselves up to succeed. So then we can focus on talking about educational theory or how do we help our learners be more engaged in our activities so that this, all the background stuff just becomes part of your system and your process. Excuse me. Sorry. So once we had our process map, we used that to test out with those first couple examples that we talked about. I also tested out doing an education plan with my husband. So he's an expert CME activity planner now. And we also debriefed along as we went through this to see, you know, how is this really working? Do we need more tweaks? And then that led us to update a bunch of our documents. So now instead of having a CME application and expectations, we just have one education plan that we can pull up anytime and complete on a phone call. As Trish said, we also have always met with our planners, and that's been our kickoff to doing anything. And we still do that. We just updated our planning meeting agenda to match that education plan so that we're sure that we're asking all the questions we need to ask of them and we're getting all the information that we need to keep moving forward. So this is what our process map looks like now, and it's super small, but we basically got it down to 12 steps here. So that really helps me when I'm thinking about it, Trish when we're thinking about it, and we can use it as a checklist as we go through things. And I'm happy to share this with anyone if you want to see it. But just putting it here to show that it is possible. You can get it down to sort of this really smooth, exactly what we need to get process.
And so this is Tricia. What we learned is, yes, barriers, of course, is our workload, priorities, and availability. So you need to definitely, like I said, you can't rush or drop something else just to take care of you know, one group. You have to make sure that everybody is taken care of straight across the board. Once again, that comes back to following on your team members as well. So big one is requires flexibility, hence all the bamboo that you see in the different slides, bending, going with the flow. You need to be able to bend with what is to come. So if that means to like Marcy was saying, adjust the CME plan or sit down and meet and talk with people and get their input and maybe help, you know, bend them that way. Or you just need to be flexible in the process and willing to change. And then commercial support, we haven't really run into any huge problems or actually run into this situation, I should say, with commercial support. So we can't really talk upon how big of a barrier this could become. Of course, we all know it does make things a little bit more complex, but it definitely, as Marcy stated, it won't deter us from trying to do it still. So it's still a possibility. We don't like to look at that as a huge barrier. What helped, so the first go around, the learners were very motivated. they wanted the CME, but unfortunately the director and the coordinators weren't quite as motivated. So we weren't receiving what we needed from them on our end. So they weren't meeting our requirements. So that made it a little frustrating and harder. So it dragged it along. Excuse me. And then the other one that we had said that helps a lot is to be able to verbally ask about relevant financial relationships. Like we can do that over the phone, as Marcy stated, or as I stated in the actual meeting, and then that way you have that documentation right there and then. And then also that it makes it easier when the meeting is already happening. So like that one that I had mentioned, that was a great experience. That meeting was already taking place. And then the other one is updating the document. So as I mentioned before, being flexible and whatnot is redevelop the CME plan, disclosure process, etc. And then once again, the teamwork is the big one. Did we make a difference? Patient care, that one's a hard one to measure, so I can't really speak upon that. People did get the CME that they did want, so that's a big one. And then, of course, make a friend. We made many friends, and just from that second attempt, that second go-around, we received quite a few referrals just from that gentleman. So he's helped expand our program tremendously. So that's a huge benefit. And then overall, that the process seems to have become a lot faster. So we're able to once again focus on what we really want to focus on, which is education and helping the learners actually take away something as opposed to just checking their emails. So yeah, we like to definitely think we make a difference. And so the comes down to just courage, and you just have to say yes and try it. It seems very overwhelming, but once you take a step back and continue, as Marcy said, to ask why are we doing this, and do we really need this? Is this just redundant extra work? And really realize and notice what's out there around you in the universe, and work collaboratively with your others. Fellow teammates.
And so when we first started this, we had this fear that, maybe this will become the thing that we do all the time, and we wouldn't be able to deal with that, right? So if all of our 200 activities suddenly were like, we want approval tomorrow, we could not handle that. And so we thought, well, let's just try it and see what happens. And that really hasn't happened. Word has gotten out that we're faster and we're better, but we haven't had a huge increase in people asking to plan the activities tomorrow. So that has not been a realistic fear for us. Maybe we should still be nervous about it. Maybe that will still happen. But we've had some fast turnarounds, but we've just been able to deal with it. So we've been able to say yes because we're ready for it. So that's been really good. And I think we both feel much better about our jobs because we're doing something more interesting. We're being able to talk to people about doing high quality education more often than nagging people for signed forms or things like that. So it's just been much more rewarding for us as a program as well. So that's been really good. So I think we'll stop there. We want to hear more from you guys about how do you build efficiency into your process? Has anybody approved an activity in a day, and how did that go?
Great. So thank you so much. That was amazing. And I have so many questions. Okay. But I noticed that a lot of people actually have questions in the chat box. So we'll go with their questions, and then I'll get all my questions in at the end. So, and just a reminder to everyone that joined, because I saw actually there are a few people that joined late. If you want to ask a question, do it there's a chat box, so type your question there. If you want to actually ask your question on the phone because it's complicated, or you want to share something that you've done, and just let us know who you are, and I'll have Erin unmute your line. So that being said, I guess I'll go from the top down in the notes. Erin actually wrote a note to everyone, and because we know we here at Cedars we're ACCME, we're an ACCME provider, and the University of Utah is an ACCME provider. But just a note about IMQ. So she wrote that note. The IMQ has said that it is acceptable to collect a disclosure verbally, as long as you, A, tell them the full definition of a commercial interest, B, ask for disclosure of individual and their spouse/partner, and C, for any financial relationships for the past 12 months. Document conversation and date it. So that's just a little sort of information just to know that you could do what they suggested in the beginning, which is what they did, which is a verbal disclosure. So I have questions about that too, but I'll ask the next question. So Andrea Harrow, who she had a question, she asked, this fast track CME process sounds great for one-off single activities. Have you done it for an RSS and then transitioned it to a regular annual activity approval with forms, etc.? So who wants to answer? Marcy or?
Yeah, this is Tricia. Yeah, we have been able to do that with conferences that do occur on a regular basis. So as opposed to having to sit down with them, we've kind of eliminated that step because most likely it's going to be the same content, and it'll be pretty much the same professional gap and what they want to accomplish. So we do eliminate the meeting process or the meeting step. But pretty much everything else it flows the same. So we still follow the same process, but we just don't have to go through the whole first initial step of drawing up a whole new CME plan. And once again, like I said, taking the time for them to sit down and meet, because we all know a lot of the faculty and physicians are always busy. So it is hard for them to physically sit down and meet. So that does help when a course takes place on a regular basis to eliminate that one step.
And we have done it with series. We actually started doing it with series. And then because we figured that out, then we moved it to courses. So it was much easier for us to start with series for some reason.
Yeah, the series are a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's just because we're used to thinking about that as more of a routine process, but that's a great question.
So just as a follow-up, though, to that, how often do you sort of renew or reevaluate your regularly scheduled series? Do you do it annually, or like how long do you allow them to provide credit for without making them go through some sort of process again?
Annually, we do ask them to reflect back on the past year, and we do that over email with a Word document. And we've done that since the beginning of our program, I think. And then recently we'd like to actually meet with people face-to-face every 3 to 5 years. We're looking at about 4 years now because it's taken us a while to get through the 130 series. And because we found that in-person meeting to be so helpful for our courses and other activities, because people forget who we are and we forget who they are. And so just to kind of check in and say like, oh, we want to brag about you. What are you really doing? So we're doing that now more often as well, which this has helped us free up some time to do those kinds of things. So then we can talk to them about engaged learners and education theory and things.
Great. So Sylvia Rodriguez, she had a question, and I wrote this question too, which is, would you be willing to share your documents? I mean, I was very interested in knowing sort of what your educational plan and your agenda looks like. I assume that's what she's asking about.
Yes.
Yeah. And I have a question. How long is your planning document? How many pages is it?
6 pages.
How many?
6.
6 pages. Oh, I need to see it. I need to see a 6-page. I think
I'd love to share it.
That would be great.
And we want your feedback. So if something's missing, please tell us.
Well, that's wonderful, because I know here, we're going through a process of we're trying to incorporate some of the new criteria into our planning documents, as well, I'm sure many people on this call. So I would love to see that, because I have an idea, but maybe I can simplify it. So that would be wonderful. And let's see. So there was another question here from Priscilla Graham, and she was asking, how do you handle content validation in such a short time? Have you had that experience, I guess?
Yeah.
And is that handled by you? I guess that's another question.
It isn't. We're the providers, so we're accountable for content validity according to the ACCME policy. And so we handle that in a lot of different ways, but we found it's much easier for us to talk to the planners about content validity and what that means and what our expectation is of them. We also think because we're an academic medical center that maybe we have a different perspective on that than some other providers might, where our people are really focused on being research-based and evidence-based constantly, and so that conversation part really only takes a minute or two because they kind of get what we're explaining. We do also document it on our disclosure form, and I am about to add it into the education plan because I think it is so important to make sure that we're making that point that we want solid content that is based in education to keep the bias out. So I think that's an area that we're still evolving in, but we do not review slides. That comes up quite a bit when people talk about content validation. And we don't ask our directors to do that either. We just ask them to have a conversation with their faculty and say, listen, our expectation is you're providing the best available evidence, that clinical care recommendations are appropriate, that your content is valid. And so we just kind of work on that on an honor system.
That's great. I mean, I know that that's one thing that we still use slide review as a way to validate content, but we are also, I think we do overkill here, and I'm sure that's the case in many places where we're also having them check that that's true. You know, I mean, like we have all these value statements in our disclosure where they're already attesting to the fact that they're going to do that, and then we do it again and we do it again, and I think, you know, right. Yes, I'm going to look at your process map as well. So I think that was very good. So thank you. And there's another question now from Disley Juarez. She has a question. She said, how do you schedule the meetings? Any tips? Is it with the entire planning team or just the leads? I imagine it would be overwhelming to try to schedule a meeting with the entire planning team.
Yeah, no, we asked to, this is Tricia, we asked to meet with the directors who are overseeing the activity. So that's those guys are the key players. And then we do like to have at least one person that oversees the logistics, the coordinator, so they're aware of what needs to take place. But once again, I mean, like we were talking about content, we like to speak to somebody that is very familiar with the content of the activity, because we're, Marcy stated, trusting them on our system that the content is valid. So we definitely want to have that key individual at the meeting. But we're always, I mean, we're flexible because we know that it's hard to get everybody at the table, but as long as we have one person that's familiar with that key piece of the content, and then the logistics of the activity is what our biggest requirements are when it comes to meetings.
And that person is usually extremely busy, so we tend to be very open with our scheduling. So we've had meetings at 7 in the morning, and we've had meetings at 5 at night. It doesn't often happen like that. And that, again, that might go back to us being an academic medical center, that people usually have research days set aside. So I think they're giving us that time. We'll do conference calls. We'll do Skype business meetings, you know, whatever we can do to make that work so that we get that time. We'll also do like just 20 minutes with the director where we really dig into the content, and then we talk to the coordinator more about all the other steps and process that need to happen. And we'll go and meet with them in their office as well, so they don't have to. That doesn't take away extra time as well.
Great. Well, I just wanted to remind anybody, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat box, or if you want to ask your question again on the phone, just write and we'll unmute your line. You can ask. In the meantime, I have a bunch of questions. I read through the ones that were there in the chat box, and I know because I now have more people in my office here, and I can hear them whispering questions to me. So one of the questions was, do you charge a fee for providing credit for your activities?
So we're funded by the University of Utah hospitals and clinics slightly, and then by the School of Medicine more significantly, to provide CME credit for people affiliated with the University of Utah. So how we define that shifts and changes as our system evolves. But basically, we interpret that now to mean if an activity is primarily targeted at University of Utah affiliated people, we do not charge them a fee because that's already covered. But if somebody is targeting an activity at people external to our university, we do have to charge a fee so that the university is not subsidizing that CME. So we do sometimes have fees and sometimes don't. Typically that boils down to most of our series are really internally focused. We do some joint providerships as well that have fees involved. But for the most part, we are not charging our activities fee.
That's great. I see there's another question, and we're probably going to ask you to back up in the slide deck, which is Erin asked if we could look at the process map slide in more detail, and can you walk us through each of the 12 elements?
Mm-hmm.
So would you guys mind doing that?
Sure.
Perfect. Okay, cool.
So first of all, if you're going to process map, which I think you all should do because it's awesome, I do this first just on Post-it notes, and I get different color to Post-it notes, and I'll just write down every step I can think of on a Post-it note, and then I post those on a wall or on a whiteboard, or you could just do it right on a whiteboard. And it'd be really helpful if you can do that in some public team space so that your team can walk by and they can move stuff around, or they can add a task that you missed, so that you all can just kind of sit and think about, do we have every task up there? And I would first start with like making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or how do people set up their first meeting with you or something. I would not start with disclosure first because it always makes me mad and it's super complicated. So just start with something easy first. And then you just kind of move it around, and you can come up with these streams. So you can see our process map here has 3 streams. If anybody's an Alliance member, there was an email that went out today with Cincinnati's MOC for Pediatrics process map. That's beautiful. I really recommend looking at that. But they did their streams based on people, so a director, a coordinator, the CME office staff, the learner. So you could do it that way too. Ours are time-based. So the top row are things that happen before an activity. The middle row are kind of things that happen up to an activity. And then the bottom row are things that happen either during or after an activity. So for us, our first box there is our planning meeting. And then I included who is responsible for this and what tasks or documents do we need to do that. And then our second step then is to approve that activity. So we complete the education plan, we share it, ask for any feedback, and we approve it at that point. So then our next step is sort of the next things that have to happen before that activity starts. And the first is to collect disclosures. And these don't happen in order. So Trish could be working on collecting disclosures, and I could be taking the CME tracker spot. That's our software that we use. Sorry if that was commercial support. Or so we could break off different pieces here, so we could all jump in as a team and work on this together. We collect disclosures, we set up our event in our software. That includes creating our evaluation and putting a publicity on our website, and if we're going to do registration or not through our software. We think about commercial interest support. So if we did have an activity that wanted to offer or was going after grants or exhibitors or something, then this is where that part would come in. And then we want to review all publicity for an activity before it goes out to anybody, and we're checking there to make sure the CME statements are correct. So we ask for that to come in, and then the statements that we're checking for. And then we also want to have something in our documentation that shows that learners were given those statements. So then that's our 5th box there. And then during courses, we try to observe most courses. And so those are the green boxes on the bottom. So we're observing most courses, and then following an activity, we ask for some paperwork and a course review form from the director. How did it go? What are you going to improve for next year? Look at your learner responses and what did they say. And then our financial summary comes in there, and then we charge any fees that are involved. And then for series, we put them in that annual review process that we talked about already. So it really is just pretty succinct and straightforward to remind us of all the things that have to happen.
Great, thank you.
As a follow-up, yeah, thanks. As a follow-up, I just wanted to ask, a lot of this stuff is sort of residing under your control, as opposed to getting involved with your committee or anything like that. Can you talk about how you guys decided that, for example, like reviewing disclosures, that you can do that as opposed to the committee?
Mm-hmm. So I think our associate dean was instrumental in doing that, and he has been with the program for probably 10 years, and then before that he was a CME director for a sister program of ours. And so I think that was his genius idea, really. We do have a CME advisory committee. We meet with them once a year, but they're really our strategic body. So they help us decipher what's going on politically within our institution and what kind of things we should be working towards or not working towards, or which accommodation criteria we really want to work on for our program, things like that. So we don't use them as an approver at all, and there are no requirements from ACCME that you do that. So I think that's part of where this process mapping comes in. To you ask yourself these questions. I'm going to flip forward to a couple slides. And I'll send these out so that you can kind of look at this. But in case you wanted to process map, you want to ask yourself at each step, like, why are we doing this? And if your answer is so I can sleep at night, really think about that, because it's probably stressing you out more than it's helping you sleep at night. And so I think that would fall into that. So the reason that I can, and I don't really review disclosures. I think I should probably explain that. You jump in when I'm rambling too much. So we just facilitate the collection of disclosures, and then as people have conflicts of interest, we push that back to the directors and ask them to evaluate that, because they're our content experts and they really understand the content that's being presented and what this relationship is and how that might impact that. I don't have that kind of subject matter knowledge, right? And this is the other reason that we don't review slides either, because I don't know what that means. I can't do anything with that. I don't know if there's a conflict inherent in the slide. So we really rely on our directors to do that and then complete back to us, how did you decide to resolve this conflict with your speaker? And so we think of our directors as part of our planning process, part of our providership in that partnership. So they're really doing that.
Well, let me even say, so this is Tricia. So this is what Marcy brought up before, is when you ask yourself why, you really need to ask, is this, we're doing this because of the institution, the requirements of the institution, or is this really the ACCME requirements? And so we've learned that you don't have to review slides. The ACCME does not require you to review slides. So that's another reason to really ask the question, is this required of the institution, or is this required by the ACCME?
And there are some things that our university requires us to do. So we also have a non-disclosure discrimination statement that has to appear on all of our information. And that is a requirement of our institution. But most of our policies were really our own office's policies. And so we own those. We can rewrite those. And we ran some of them by our advisory committee to make sure we weren't going off the rails, but a lot of it really is our ownership of our program and what is it that we want from our educational partners, and how do we simplify that so that we're not overburdening our physicians who are already facing burnout. Did I answer your question, Erin, or just wander?
Yeah, that's great. And I think, you know, it's interesting because I'm hearing that from the IMQ as well. I mean, the traditional methodology was that we had a CME committee and that we had to have the CME committee review every single application that came in. And if that is the policy of the organization, that's fine, but that isn't actually written in the requirements you know, at least any longer. And so it's up to you to think about, like, go through a process like this and think about, does it make sense to have the whole CME committee? It might actually, but it might not. So that's just
it might be helping you. If it is, great. But if it's just holding you up and hurting you, and it's one more thing people have to do that they don't care about or don't have time to really focus on, it's not helping you.
That's right. Megan, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a question, you know, on top of that, and then you sort of started to address it, Erin, I think, and maybe you could answer the question, or maybe someone who's joining. So, with regard to slide review, I mean, as the way, that's not a requirement of IMQ, correct? I mean,
no, I mean, they want to make sure that you have an appropriate mechanism to manage any relevant financial relationships, but then they also want to make sure that you are establishing appropriate content validation mechanism also. So it's kind of the two in hand. And slide review makes sense, but if you're doing something that's not going to have any slides, if you're doing a simulation or you're doing, you know, a discussion, you can't do that. So that's another reason to evolve and think more about what else can we do to hit those requirements, which isn't necessarily just a slide review.
Great. I don't see any other questions in the box, but I did have another question for you both. So how do you actually document the verbal disclosures? I mean, do you go and then fill out a disclosure form for them? I mean, I know on our end, if I got a verbal disclosure from someone, I would then go into our system and actually enter it in, as if I got it, as if they did it themselves. And I'm just curious to know I'm curious to know if you do the same thing.
I've done that. We also will go back to our education plan, and we have a section there about commercial interests when we're trying to decide if we're going to collect disclosures and if they're going to get support or not. And so we'll just add a note right there in the education plan that says, on this date, we verbally read the definition, and Dr. Smith said she has no relevant financial relationships to this content. So that we're documenting right there and then when it's happening as well.
So what you just said was really interesting. You said was really interesting because you said you decide whether or not you're going to collect disclosures. So So talk a little bit about that, because I think that was something that I remember Ani telling me when she left the meeting. And she's like, "You're going to love this." So anyways, I don't know if I was going to love it or not, but I'm curious to know about that. Yeah.
So when it says this, I opened this document from SCMEC because I think it's amazing that they made us this, and I know people have asked for it for a long time. So if you haven't seen this, go find it. It's on their website, COI Flowchart. And so this first question here is the content of your activity related to products or business lines of SCME defined commercial interest? And if you answer no, this is an activity where we're going to teach physicians how to do statistics. This is an activity about professional development. There's no way that any commercial interest products or business lines or anything could come into play into this content. Then I do not need to collect disclosures because it's impossible for people to have a conflict of interest when the content is not about commercial interest. So in that case, I do not need to collect disclosures, but I still need to tell the learners that there are no relationships here. So we still have to disclose to them that there's no relevant financial relationships with an SCME defined commercial interest for anyone in control of the content of the activity. And I think our statement says something about because it's impossible because the content is not related, so that we're explaining the difference there so people get that. But we use this quite often. And if you look at the not quite often, I don't want to say that, probably like 30% of our activities.
Yeah.
So, because we're still doing a lot of new guidelines, treatment options, things like that. So those are very clearly business interests, commercial interests. But we're doing a lot of mindfulness stuff now that is never going to cross the lines of a product or business line. Faculty development, that's a hot topic. Quality improvement stuff. I feel like So this has been super helpful for me that when they made this flowchart. I had my own that were nowhere near as neat. I was glad that they gave us this. And so now in our education plan, if we make that decision, it even references back to this. So we'll just copy exactly what that says.
Sorry, I had to mute my mic because, of course, we're by a hospital, so there's lots of sirens. And she's totally right, Ani. I am so excited by this. I have seen this flowchart, and I don't know why. I've never interpreted it that way. So I'm hoping others are just as excited as I am, because this really does. We have a lot of similar things, leadership things, and we're getting disclosure forms from people, but it makes no sense. And I have this new activity that I want to start doing, which is this practice transformation.
Cool.
Again, none of it has to do with any, commercial interest. So that will really simplify. And I'd love to see, if you don't mind sharing, when you're sharing stuff, the statement that you actually put,
sure.
which I'm assuming is your disclosure statement, because it might be beneficial for us to look at tweaking ours. So I just want to know, does anyone else have questions? I see there's people are still on here, so you're listening. And if you want, you can ask a question.
Or does anybody else have efficiency tips that they can share, or cool things that you're doing that have simplified and changed your life?
And then Erin also asked, does anybody have any feedback on this as well? Like, does anyone else have a question about sort of this process map, or this, not this process map, I guess it is a process map.
Yeah, but I think that it would be very fearful for people to not collect disclosures in the IMQ environment. I think we would have to check that over with the IMQ before we jump on board on that. But I will tell you that I have a client that is in the process of submitting a reaccreditation application for this next cohort, and they have updated the application and they have updated the structured abstract related to what you have to submit, and it is different. You don't have to submit disclosure forms for every activity that's selected. You have to submit every disclosure form for just 2 of the activities that they've selected, and that's new. IMQ used to require disclosure forms for every activity that they select to review. So that's a big difference.
And just to clarify, Erin, I think you pick the examples, right? I mean, you choose which ones you're going to show, not them.
Right. You're going to choose which 2 out of the 8 approximate activities that they select to audit. You get to pick which 2 you want to submit the disclosure forms for.
Can you guys have IMQ talk to ACCME about that?
Yeah.
Well,
actually, that's a little different. I mean, the ACCME is not requiring you to submit any disclosure forms any longer. They are asking you to submit now basically a spreadsheet, which includes the list of everybody involved, what the disclosures were, and what you did about it if it was a conflict. So it is actually a little even more streamlined than the IMQ.
And I know from our latest, I mean, we just had to give an example of what our disclosure form looked like.
Right. That's correct.
Yeah, we didn't supply them for every single one. So there were 2 more questions, actually. Barbara Stokes, who's sitting in my office, since the other room they were trying to do the meeting in didn't work, she was asking, what about going back to sort of the collection of disclosure forms, what about for sort of case conferences? I would imagine you'd still have to collect their disclosures, but because...
Yeah, we do. Sometimes those will have like a moderator who is determining which cases get in and out and is really doing the facilitating during the activity. And so in that case, we'll get the moderator to disclose. But if it's one where everyone's presenting cases or something, everyone discloses.
Wait, say that again, actually, the second part?
Yeah, if 6 people are presenting a case, then we ask those 6 people to disclose. So we kind of depend on, is it being moderated and facilitated, or are people really just presenting cases and it's moving on to the next? We do both.
Okay. I see. That's good. I mean, I think we do both here. I'm not sure about others. So Disley Juarez had a question, which is, do you share this process map with those who are requesting CME, or is it only for your office? That's a really good question.
We really just use it in our office, but we would share it if anybody cared. What we found is people really just want to know from us, what do you need from me to get the CME? And so this wouldn't help them. We do have a list of expectations that we'll share with new joint providers or new partners that we think we might have a struggle with over certain things, so that, we can say, hey, we told you we don't do event planning, and we really rely on you to collect the disclosures, but we'll facilitate how you do that. Then it's really a partnership. We do talk about that early on with new planners and new partners in our planning meeting as well. So it comes up, but nobody has really wanted to see this, or have we shared it? I don't think we shared it with any of our educational partners, but we would. That's part of our customer service forward. We're completely transparent.
When you're not doing sort of a fast track, which is what you did here, I mean, what is your normal time frame, or do you have a normal time frame for when you like to actually receive applications? I mean, what's your sort of ideal situation versus obviously the expedited version?
So this has become our normal process. And it just takes as long as it takes. When we have time, it takes more time. When people call us and say, how soon do I need to meet with you, we'll usually say, when you have a good idea of what your conference is going to cover, then we want to meet with you. And typically that's 3 to 6 months out. But we do these in a week and we do them in a year from now. So it's also kind of opened those doors for us so that we don't have to make those kind of deadlines or requirements.
I mean, that's great. I mean, I know in our office, like we unfortunately, or fortunately, we do the planning, but then we also handle all the logistics and marketing and things like that. So we have different timelines. I mean, if it's a standalone course, there's no commercial, there's nobody registering, you know what I mean? It's internal. We have fast track things, and I did so earlier this year. But for a lot of the activities that we do, outside of the regularly scheduled series, like a lot of the big courses, our time frame is usually 6 to 9 months. And a lot of that is just because they actually have to be marketed. And if we're responsible for that, we need appropriate lead time. And if there's going to be grants or exhibits or other things or people traveling from somewhere, so
contracts, all that.
Yeah, exactly. All of that we have to sort of take into consideration. It adds another layer, but I love that, I love the idea of this, like the ability that you could do it. I think, I guess like going back, and I don't know if people have questions, please put them in the box, but, we have a lot of approvals and things here, so it's, as you were saying, like all these people that we have to have sign off on things. And, I have many times have questioned that. It's like, do we really need that? I mean, here, the thing is we do charge fees for everything, but even the people that are signing off on stuff aren't the people that are responsible for paying those fees.
Right.
So, it makes me it gives me a list of kind of things I want to go back to, our more senior leadership and ask them. I mean, it's a pain. I mean, we struggle to get these people's signatures. And we've simplified that process. Like we've gone and we've made it all digital. Like nobody actually has to physically sign it. We put everything in DocuSign, but even that, we still struggle with trying to get them to do it. And, this just sort of gives me food for thought. And I'm sure others as well, that.
Well, and maybe maybe people just need to be notified. Maybe you don't have to get a response back.
Right. And I think that would be, maybe that would work because basically at that point, if you're notifying them, they could still tell you, don't do it.
Oh, right. So we had the signatures that we required the director and then their department chair. Their department chair wasn't looking at it, but the reason we did that is because we wanted department chairs to know what was happening in their department, right?
Right.
But then we realized, that's not our responsibility. It's really up to this director to make sure they have the support of their department. And so why are we trying to wade into that? And when we looked at the history of it, it was because we weren't getting fees back when we were charging fees for those things. And so instead, we just say, hey, there's fees for this. Are you going to be able to pay that? Right? And then they're like, oh, I got to talk to my department chair. Okay, great. So we're still accomplishing the goal, but we didn't put in this bottleneck of signatures and notifications and stuff. When really our point was, there's going to be fees and you're going to have to pay them. Are you going to be able to? And so it really got us back to why are we doing this? And let's just do that instead of trying to build in all of these ways to make ourselves not have to tackle difficult questions with difficult people, right? And really those people just want to say yeah, I approve of this or I don't.
Yeah, they don't want to actually sign something. I agree with you. I think it is on the onus of the people who want to plan the activity, who want to do it, to get the approvals. And so I like. And
even that, I think we had 2 activities 10 years ago that didn't pay their fees, and it didn't break our program, but yet we designed this whole complete system around that weird exception where we could have handled it better with better communication.
Yeah. I'm just going to add that to my list. You brought up a good or a good comment earlier about the process map. So for MOC, so I will send that around to anyone who's interested in it because I am on that list, and I did save that email earlier. But that's a good question, and I think you guys, I saw you commenting, or Marcy, I think you were writing back and forth, or you wrote something about it. But the question for you: have you used this for MOC? I mean, and how much MOC credit are you doing right now? I guess.
I think we're in the weeds with MOC. We are doing everything that we can in PARS, plus surgery, plus dermatology, plus pathology, which we'll soon be able to do in PARS, and somebody else, plastic surgery, maybe a few other boards. We're probably at about 7 or 8 boards now that we're doing MOC with. And it's a mess because it's 7 different sets of rules, right? But we did process map for that. And probably mostly I'm the one keeping that organized and straight at this point, though I need to give it to Trish so she can help me. And then our assistant, who is actually doing all the data entry, she's got it pretty clear as well. So we do have a process map for that. It's older, and I have not kept it updated, which is why I need to share my knowledge with other people to help me manage that. So we did, that was the first thing I did, actually, when we first thought about including MOC credit in our process, was I pulled this out and then I drew an arrow for where it would go, and then I did a separate process map for what that would look like. And I think that's still the document that I'm working on.
That's great.
But Cincinnati's is beautiful. It's super detailed. It's maybe a little more overwhelming. I would probably condense some of it, but it's really good.
Well, that's good because I'm talking to them on Thursday about MOC because I've gone to a couple of their sessions about MOC, and we're really trying to start to roll it out and be able to implement it here. So
pediatrics is the most sticky one, and that's the one that they've really tackled. So I think that's really great.
Okay, so I think I don't know if anybody else has any questions. I know Christina, you wrote a question here that the process map is small, and will there be a copy later? Yes, we'll send a copy of a set of the slides later. In addition, as we noted at the beginning, we're recording this, so we will also make it live on the SCMEC website. So once it is live, we will make that. We'll send out a notice that everyone knows, and they can watch it again, or they can share it with their colleagues should they think it's appropriate for them. And Erin, do you have any more questions? I don't. Otherwise, I think we maybe can send say thank you very much. Let's see.
I agree. Thank you, everybody, very much. It was so very helpful. I really appreciate you guys sharing your expertise with us.
Yes, thank you again. And
we love making new friends. So
yes, we like friends too. So thank you, and it's good when they're on the West Coast. So
that's right.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks to everyone that joined. So have a great evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Get the whole on here. That was good.